Hello and welcome, my name is Thomas, and in this video we're going to talk about the gear to get when getting started with video. Okay, so in a previous video, which I will link either above or somewhere down below in the description, I talked all about how important video is and how effective it can be, particularly if you're growing an online business. So I won't rehash a lot of the things that I talked about. As a quick recap, I talked about how you can use it for things like memberships or membership sites, welcome videos, advertisements, tutorials. There's just a ton that you can do with video, being that it is such a prevalent platform or media that is used online today, not only to entertain, but to educate as well as to help spread awareness about the products and services that we're creating. Now myself, I've been using video for a little over 2 years now. I've started incorporating it slowly into the different products and services that I provide. I've done online courses, I've done a number of welcome videos, I've done a ton of tutorials, and then of course this YouTube channel. Now throughout that process, I have learned a ton. I've bought a whole bunch of different type of camera gear. I've experimented with ways to shoot, everything from, a dining room table all the way out to on site. If I'm out somewhere, like a previous video I did, I was out at a cottage, so I filmed there. I've been out on a trail before, all the way to creating a miniature set inside my garage. However, one of the most common questions that I've got, not only on this channel, but from my clients and customers who I've worked with who are interested in getting started with video, is what gear do I get? So pretty frequently I'll get the question something along the lines of, okay, so what lens are you using? What camera are you using? So what I wanted to do in this video was give you a nice checklist, specific gear that you can get for getting started with video. So some of this I'm currently using now, some of it I've kind of upgraded from. However, what I wanted to do is put together a nice compilation, a nice list of items that are great for getting started. So that, you can kind of learn from my mistakes. I've bought some gear that didn't work out so well. I've bought other gear that I'm still using today. That way you can kind of cut through the stuff that you don't need and focus on the things that you do. One of the other things that I wanted to mention as well is don't think that you have to just go out and buy all of this immediately. What you can do is you can kind of pick through and say, I just want to start with these few things. I just want to get a camera, a lens, and a microphone, and that's it for now. Or you may just want to say, I like this lens better, so I like your suggestion for camera, but I'd rather get this lens, or vice versa. The nice thing about this, and I wish I had a video like this getting started myself, was that you can use it as a baseline. You can say, okay, so he's using all this gear and I can decide from here if I want to copy exactly what he's doing or if I want to try something different. Okay, so the first piece of gear we're going to touch on today is the actual camera. Now I can't show you the camera I'm using now because obviously I'm recording with it, but here is its predecessor, and it is the Canon EOS 80D. Now the one that I'm using now and that I recommend is the 90D. It's the newer version of this. If for whatever reason you wanted something that was a little bit cheaper, you could go ahead and go with the 80D. This is what's called a crop sensor lens, but from what I've done a ton of research. You can spend anywhere up to $6,000 on Canon's more prosumer model, which would get you, more options, and it'd be a full frame camera and all that. But the thing I like about the 80D and the 90D is that they're extremely easy to use, and they have a lot of the core features that we need. They go beyond kind of your typical point and shoot cameras. They're not quite at the level or the bulkiness of some of the more professional grade cameras, plus they're a lot more affordable. They've got a ton of different cameras that are available through Canon and Canon's website, and there's other manufacturers as well. But one of the things that I've noticed is it has a nice balance between some of the features that are built into it and the ease of use. One of the other things that I really like, particularly if you're just getting started, is that it has one of these flip out screens, which means when you're going through the process of recording, you can actually see yourself as you're recording. I've seen a number of the Canon cameras out there, and even some of the other the cameras from other manufacturers don't have this inherent, or if they do, they kind of implement it in kind of a weird, strange way. such as popping up from the top. I've never really liked that because it tends to get in the way if you're going to mount a microphone on top. Okay, so the next thing you're going to need, of course, is going to be an SD card. This is going to be a single slot, pretty basic SD card that it's going to require. The one that I'm obviously using most primarily is going to be in the 90D, which is currently recording, but what I use is a 128 gig card, and you want to make sure that whatever SD card that you're going to be using, you want to make sure that it's going to shoot at a speed, or it's going to be able to read at a speed fast enough for the type of footage that you are recording. So in terms of that specific card, I will leave a link to the card as well as all of the gear that I'm talking about throughout the length of this video. They'll be at links below this video, so you don't have to worry or be confused about which specific things to get. And next up on the list is the lens. So a lot of research went into this, and in some ways, I actually consider the lens just as important, if not more important, than the camera itself, because this is going to dictate pretty heavily what the footage is actually going to look like. So a lot of people like the kind of, and you can probably see it right now, kind of the blurry background effect that you get with a higher grade or higher end lens. So what I'm using, or what I recommend for just starting out, is getting the Sigma 18 to 35 millimeter f1.8. So the f1.8 just means that it's going, without getting into all of the kind of nerdy camera specs, all that means is the aperture, the kind of hole through which the light passes through, is going to be wider, allowing more light in and allowing for a little bit of a blurrier background. Another reason why this is a great starter lens is that it's a variable focal length, which means that you can go anywhere from 18, which is pretty wide even on a crop sensor, so you get a lot in the picture. And then you can even zoom in a little bit into 35 millimeters if you need to. So a lot of prime lenses, as they're known, which have a single fixed focal length, you can't zoom in or out, you just have to move that camera closer or further away. The other great thing about this as well, which we'll get to with some of the other gear that I'm going to touch on, one of the nice things about this particular lens is that it's at a good range, a focal length range, where you can just take the camera with this lens, set it up on a table or a desk, and it's going to be at a pretty good distance where that's going to work well, particularly with the microphone that we're going to touch on. So it all kind of fits together really well. It gets you a pretty nice blurry background, and it gets you a pretty sharp and crisp picture as well. And another piece that is often overlooked, or what I would even consider arguably the most important piece of camera gear that you could get, is a microphone. So you can have the most beautiful image in the world. You could have that nice blurry background. You could have like a beautiful sunset before you. You could have the any sort of like landmark or whatever it is. You can get the picture perfect, but if the audio quality is bad, people will not like it. There's just something off about using that kind of, built-in laptop microphone, or even using something like the earbud microphones. There's just an inherent quality that we expect when it comes to video, particularly if you're going to have a really high quality video that we're talking about in this type of process. So there's a lot of microphones out there, but the one that I recommend is the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. So not to be confused with the Rode VideoMic Pro, you want the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. Like I said, I'll leave a link below this video to the specific one that I'm talking about. I made the mistake early on of buying the Rode VideoMic Pro. The difference between the Pro and the Pro Plus is that it plugs in, as you would expect, to your camera's microphone jack. However, the difference with the Pro Plus is that it automatically turns on and off with your camera. With the Pro version, one of the things that I noticed is that you had to manually turn it on and off, and so I would record a video, I would forget to turn off the microphone, and inherently the battery would die. You have to worry about that with the Pro Plus because it has, like I said, the ability built into where it will shut itself off if you are not currently using it, or if the camera gets shut off. Now, aside from those features, it just has built into it a very nice audio quality. It's very crisp for what you're paying. You're going to get a really good quality out of that microphone, something that is that's way better and far beyond something you're going to get with kind of the built-in microphone of the camera itself, or using something like even some lavalier mics. There's some good ones out there, or especially using something like your laptop or earbuds or something like that. Investing in a microphone like this is going to make a big difference. One of the other great things about it as well is it mounts on top of your camera. So like I alluded to previously, you could set it up on your desk with something like the SwitchPod, which I'll be talking about here in a moment, but you can mount it on top of the camera, get it a decent distance away from your face, and it's going to pick that sound up just fine. Another piece that's going to be really important to your setup is lighting. So what I used to start out with was a set of newer LED lights, which again I'll link below, but these lights are really simple and basic and easy to set up, and they're kind of optional. Lighting is extremely important, but it also depends largely upon where you're shooting. So I've since actually upgraded to a much bigger light, which I wouldn't recommend starting out because it's not something you can exactly move around a lot. But the newer lights are great because they fold up into this tiny little container and they're really easy to set up. They're also very portable as well. But what's really important with the lighting is just that that you adapt to where you're shooting. So like I said, I've kind of got my own little setup here in my garage, but if you're going to shoot like in your living room or somewhere else where there's a lot of natural lighting that's hitting you, you might not need as much light to begin with. One of the things that you want to be very careful of, however, and very conscious of, is that you don't want a lot of light behind you. So if you've got a window or something behind you, what's going to happen naturally is the camera is going to adjust to compensate for that. And if it's trying to bring a very bright background in focus or at the proper light balance, what it's going to do is it's going to turn you really dark, at which point you're going to want some lights in front of you to kind of counterbalance that. Best case scenario, if you're not going to use lights, make sure that the most prominent light source is in front of you, not behind you. If you're going to be in a darker room like an office or something that doesn't have a lot of lighting, then you're going to want to invest in one or two of these newer LED lights. They're great because, like I said, they're really portable. They're also adjustable, so you can turn them to more of an orange tint to more of a kind of sunlight tint, so you can mess with that. And then you can also adjust the brightness. So you can kind of adapt how bright you want these lights to be. Like I said, really easy to set up, really portable, great for starting out with. And the next piece of gear I wanted to talk about today is one called the SwitchPod. This is actually created by Pat Flynn. He's a YouTuber as well. He's also an entrepreneur. But I actually decided to back this as soon as I saw it on Kickstarter, and there's a number of different reasons for this. I first started out using what's called a GorillaPod. You may have seen them before. They've got kind of the movable arms that you can use, but they're extremely difficult to work with, particularly because sometimes your camera can tip over. This one's nice because you can just kind of flip them open and then it sets on your desk just like this. So really portable, very thin, very easy to use. As you can see, this is actually magnetized, so those things stay together. But you can just set this right up on your desk, and obviously your camera with your microphone on it can go right there. Now, I'm not personally much of a vlogger, so I don't go around like carrying my camera recording myself. I've done a few things like that, but if you wanted to, it's kind of designed to where you can do that. It's almost got like this built-in handle with grooves in it that make it really easy to carry. Now, what does not come with it by default is this kind of ball head. So you can kind of, I won't remove it, but this is essentially what you would have. You just screw your camera right onto this. This ball head I actually took off of the GorillaPod and screwed it onto here. The reason I really like this is because it's adjustable. I can actually go ahead and loosen this, and then this can be kind of positioned in any way I need it to. The great thing about that is if you're setting it on a table that's not exactly 100% even, what you can do is you can adjust the ball head with the camera on top of it to make sure that the image is nice and level and straight. So what I'll do is you can actually buy this ball head by itself and separately from the SwitchPod itself, if you wanted to buy that in addition. Otherwise, for most cases, it's going to work great just to set it right on the ball head, or right on top of the SwitchPod, I should say. And the last piece of equipment that I wanted to talk about in terms of the core kit items is a tripod. So there are a ton of tripods out there, and the difference between the SwitchPod and the tripod is that the tripod's going to be much taller, something that you would set on the ground. If you wanted to be able to stand up in front of the camera and talk to the camera, and you don't necessarily want to use something like the SwitchPod to set it on your desk, then you are going to want a tripod. So the tripod, I'm currently shooting with it, so I can't show it to you, at least in this current frame. However, it also has a ball head on top of it so that you can adjust it. It's got a nice little level inside of it so that you can see if your camera is level. It's also very easy to extend, and it's also very portable, and it's also very durable. So I'll go ahead and leave a link to the tripod I recommend. But if you're going to want to stand up like in your living room or in an office space or something like that and talk to the camera, then you're going to want a taller tripod, at which point a nice basic newer tripod like the one I'll be showing. You should be able to see some imagery here of what that particular tripod would look like and how it would be useful. Okay, and I've got a few other kind of notable mentions as well. One of them would be what is called an ND, or neutral density filter. So what you can kind of think of this as is sunglasses for your camera. So if you want to do any sort of shooting outdoors, if you're going to be in sunlight or in a very bright room, you're definitely going to want one of these. This is a variable ND filter, which means that as you twist it, it actually becomes darker or lighter. And the reason for this, without going into all the technical details, is what you don't want to do is start adjusting the image of the actual video that you're shooting. What you'd rather do is just, through something like this, adjust the amount of light that's being let in. We'll be talking about here in a second how to set up the camera, what settings to use. And if you're going to be using those particular settings that we're going to be talking about, what's going to happen, particularly if you're using a more open aperture, is that it's going to just flood out. It's going to be completely white unless you start messing with the camera settings. The great thing about this is you get to keep that nice blurry background while darkening the picture enough to where it's going to work with those camera settings. Similarly, if you're going to be shooting outside, another thing that I'm going to recommend is what is known as a dead cat. And they do actually sell these for the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus. And all it is a big fuzzy thing that you put over the top of your microphone. And what this is going to do is that if you're recording outside for whatever reason, this is going to dampen the sound of wind, so that it's going to pick up your voice more clearly, and you don't have that kind of constant whooshing sound that you would get if you're outside. You're just going to get at least a lot less of that wind and a lot more of you talking. Okay, so now what I wanted to talk about is some of the basic settings to get right on your camera as you're getting up and running. So a couple of other things too. You'll notice that if you get this particular lens, you've got a lens hood that comes with it. This is mainly going to be useful if you're outdoors. This is going to help sunlight from refracting off the lens and creating big glares or flares. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you're going to be using that. It's not essential if you're going to be recording indoors. Now, in terms of the actual settings on the camera, once you turn it on, the first thing, and just so you know, as kind of a quick aside in regards to the camera and the settings, there is a ton of other videos out there that can give you the nitty-gritty details of all the different specifications, whether you're using the 90D or the 80D or whatever camera you're using. So I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm just going to give you the base settings that I use when I'm recording videos. So the first thing that I do is I want to make sure that you've got this big dial up here. I want to set that to M. I want that to be manual because I'm going to configure the settings that I want inside the camera. Once I'm inside the camera, there's a couple of other settings that I want to set. You'll notice at the top right-hand corner, there's this Q. And then once I hit that, it's going to reveal some other settings off to the left-hand side. So the first, I want to make sure that the autofocus that I'm using is the face tracking, so that it'll track my face wherever I go to make sure that I always stay in focus. Then for the recording mode, it depends on if you are using the 90D, you're actually able to record in 4K video. That's up to you. I record in 4K and then I put it out at 1080p. The reason I record in 4K is because sometimes I punch into the image and I want that to remain super crystal clear. If you want smaller file size, however, it may be better to just shoot in 1080p. That's up to you because 4K footage can get pretty big over time. Okay, so once I'm in there, what I do is I shoot, now this is up to you, but I shoot at 24 frames per second. The reason I do that is because it tends to replicate film, kind of that cinematic look. There's a little bit of a motion blur with the footage. So I shoot at 24 frames per second. A lot of cameras go in standard with 30 frames per second, but I typically do the 24. So once I've got it set to the 4K 24 frames per second, it actually shows up as 23.98p, but it means 24 frames per second. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to set the camera's shutter speed to a little over double that. So There's no option to do 50, so I set it at 60. Again, not going to go into all the explanation as you want to double your frame rate, but I set that shutter speed to 60. The next setting that I want to do is make sure that I've got the aperture set to be as wide open as possible. This particular lens is going to be 1.8. If you want to make sure that that background is extra blurry, you want to make sure that your aperture is as wide as possible, which means the lowest possible number, which is going to be f1.4. It's going to or f1.8 depending on the lens, but it's going to say 0.18 or 1.8, I should say, and then you'll know that you've got it as wide open as possible. The last option that you're going to have available to you, or at least the one that I'm going to be talking about today, is the ISO, and I typically just set that to auto, particularly when you're just getting started. A lot of people will control this manually. This is going to be kind of a digital way of adjusting the brightness of the image. Now, if you want to get in there and tweak this yourself, you can, but for just getting started, I'd recommend just kind of setting that to auto and letting the camera take care of that for you. Okay, so once you've got your camera all set up, you've got your settings, you're ready to start recording, I would recommend just doing a few tests to make sure that the sound is all working properly, that everything looks as it is supposed to. A couple of quick tips in terms of composition. What I like to do is I like to make sure that my face is at the higher end of the frame itself. You don't really want to put your face like in the middle of the frame, because that tends to make you look even, way shorter than you really are. So you want that to kind of be towards the top and then centered. If you're not going to be centered, then you want to consider if you've got other elements that you want to offset yourself with. Those are things to keep in mind as well. One of the other things that's really important is, particularly if you're going to be working with one of these flip out screens, is that it's really easy to, while you're talking, just look at that flip out screen. However, if you're close enough to the screen or to the camera, that's going to make you kind of be looking off camera, which is going to look a little bit strange. So what you want to do is, while you're recording video, always make it a habit to look directly into the lens while you're talking. This is a little bit weird to get used to at first, but you can kind of think of it as though you're actually just talking to a person and that person's face is the lens. A weird concept, I know, but if you do that, it helps make sure that the camera, the actual footage that you're shooting, tends to be more natural to the person watching it. Okay, and the last quick tip that I wanted to give you guys today, a question that will invariably come up, is going to be about software. What do I use to edit these? So there's a ton of options out there, but there's three main that I'm going to recommend today. The first is actually free, or it has a free version, and it's called DaVinci Resolve. I have not personally worked a lot with DaVinci. However, I've heard a lot of other YouTubers and video editors who say that it is a very solid piece of software, pretty easy to work with, and very powerful. Now, my second recommendation is the one that I'm currently using myself, which is Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro is only on a Mac, but I've found that it's got a really nice balance of being easy to use and really powerful software in terms of all that you can do with it. It's helped make my workflow for editing and creating video a lot quicker. Plus, it's a small detail, but one of the things I really like about Final Cut Pro is they've got a very easy export process, so I can actually just connect my YouTube and my Vimeo accounts to Final Cut Pro, and I can actually publish to those platforms from directly within Final Cut Pro. For me, this has just been a lot faster of an exporting process. But it's made my life a lot easier. Plus, I just have gotten used to using Final Cut Pro because I started with iMovie, which, by the way, if you're on a Mac and you like iMovie, that works great as well. Really, it's just kind of whatever works best for you. That's not going to take too much to learn. And another one I would recommend, I haven't worked a lot with it myself, however, but everybody recommends it in terms of the pro level software, is going to be Adobe Premiere Pro. As with Final Cut Pro, you're going to have to pay for a license or for a subscription. However, it's some of the most powerful and commonly used video editing software out there. Okay, so that's it. That's all the gear that I wanted to talk about in this video. I know that I covered a lot. And for some, I know that as you kind of go through these, you'll be saying something like, wow, that's pretty expensive. And it is to start with. But here's the thing. One of the things that I've noticed is that when you take a leap, or you take a jump into investing in some specific camera gear, it can make a huge difference. And one of the great things about a lot of the gear that we've talked about is that it's a pretty massive jump in quality that you get from something like a smartphone into some gear like this. One of the reasons I think so many people are hesitant to even consider starting to purchase camera gear is because they just get lost. They don't know what's going to make the biggest difference and where and why. So hopefully my goal throughout this video has been to show you the specific pieces that make the biggest difference without having to go through the process of spending $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 to figure out and experiment with what gear is going to produce the best and most efficient quality possible. Also, one of the things I'll be doing in the future is bringing in more specific tips and topics to discuss in terms of integrating video into your online business. So if there's any specific topics that you want to hear about in future videos or things you want me to delve into a lot more in depth, feel free to leave a comment on this video and I'd love to hear from you. So as always, if you found this video useful, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.